The evening glow filtered through the garden terrace's floor-to-ceiling windows, as Summer Holt sat perfectly still at a corner table, her untouched meal growing cold before her. The silk scarf wrapped elegantly around her head couldn't hide what the chemotherapy had taken her hair, her energy, her hope. She was completely alone on what might be one of her last good days. The hostess had seated her in the back, away from other diners, as if illness were contagious. As Summer stared at the empty chairs surrounding her table, fighting back tears behind designer sunglasses she wore indoors, the restaurant door opened. A man in paint-splattered work clothes entered, holding his 7-year-old daughter's hand. The little girl's eyes found Summer immediately, and she whispered something urgent to her father. What happened next would shatter Summer's carefully built walls and prove that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from the most unexpected strangers. This is their story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Summer Holt had learned to measure time differently than most people. Not in months or weeks, but in treatments. In good days versus bad days. In the space between hope and acceptance. At 34 years old, she was the youngest CEO in her industry, running Holt Digital Solutions, with the same fierce determination that had built the company from a startup in her garage to a tech empire worth hundreds of millions. But cancer didn't care about quarterly earnings or market dominance. Stage 3 breast cancer had arrived 6 months ago, like an unwelcome hostile takeover, aggressive and unrelenting. The diagnosis had come during a routine physical, something her assistant had practically forced her to schedule between board meetings. Summer had walked into that doctor's office worried about nothing more than her cholesterol levels. She walked out with a timeline that made every business deadline she'd ever faced seem meaningless. The chemotherapy had been brutal. Each treatment left her weaker, more hollowed out, as if the poison designed to save her was slowly erasing who she'd been. Her trademark auburn hair, which she'd once spent ridiculous amounts maintaining, had fallen out in clumps during the second round of treatment. She remembered sitting on her marble bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, watching strands come away in her hands, and feeling more afraid than she'd ever been in any boardroom. Summer had built her entire identity on being strong, capable, and in control. The cancer stripped all of that away with clinical efficiency. Now she wore silk scarves and designer hats to hide her baldness, not out of vanity, but because she couldn't stand the looks. The pity, the way people's eyes would flicker away, unable to hold her gaze, as if looking directly at her might somehow transfer her fate to them. Her company's board of directors had been supportive at first, offering her a leave of absence that she'd refused. Work had been her anchor, the one thing that made her feel normal when everything else was falling apart. But as the treatments intensified and her absences became more frequent, she'd felt the shift. The whispered conversations that stopped when she entered conference rooms. The carefully worded emails suggesting she might want to consider stepping back temporarily for her health. What they really meant was that a dying CEO was bad for business, bad for investor confidence, bad for the company image they'd all worked so hard to build. Summer had no family to fall back on. Her parents had died in a plane crash when she was 25, leaving her alone with an inheritance and a crushing sense of abandonment. She'd poured all that grief into building her company, working 18-hour days, turning pain into profit. She'd never married, never had time for serious relationships. Her few close friends had slowly drifted away over the years, unable to compete with her demanding schedule. Now, facing the possibility of death, she realized she'd built an empire, but forgotten to build a life. The loneliness was worse than the physical pain. Summer had nurses and doctors and specialists, all paid handsomely to care for her body. But no one held her hand during the bad nights. No one sat with her in the waiting rooms. No one asked how she was feeling beyond the clinical symptoms her oncologist needed to track. She'd started going to the Garden Terrace restaurant on her good days, the ones where the nausea wasn't overwhelming, and she could keep food down. It was a beautiful place, with soaring ceilings and walls of windows that let in natural light. She would sit alone at a corner table, order something she probably wouldn't finish, and watch other people living their normal lives. Families celebrating birthdays, couples on dates, business lunches filled with laughter and ambition. She observed them like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, trying to remember what it felt like to have people who cared whether you lived or died. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of sorts. Her latest scans had shown the tumors were shrinking. Not gone, not remission, but progress. Her oncologist had smiled genuinely for the first time in months and told her this was very encouraging. Summer had left the appointment feeling a flutter of something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. She'd driven directly to the garden terrace, determined to mark this small victory with a proper meal. She'd ordered the pan-seared salmon, her favorite before the treatments had destroyed her appetite and sense of taste. But now, sitting alone with the food growing cold in front of her, the brief spark of hope had faded back into the familiar weight of isolation. What was the point of good news if there was no one to share it with? Summer picked up her fork, trying to force herself to eat, when she noticed the hostess seating a family across the restaurant. A father and daughter, laughing about something as they looked at their menus. The little girl couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with wild curly hair pulled into pigtails, and a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. Summer felt something twist painfully in her chest. She would never have that. Even if she survived the cancer, the treatments had likely destroyed any chance of having her own family. Her oncologist had mentioned egg freezing before starting chemotherapy, but Summer had been so focused on survival that she'd dismissed it. Another regret to add to the growing collection. The little girl's laughter rang out again, pure and unself-conscious, and Summer had to look away. She blinked rapidly behind her sunglasses, refusing to cry in public. She'd done enough of that in private. The tears came easier now. Another side effect they didn't put in the brochures. Emotional volatility, her nurse had called it, as if giving it a clinical name made it less devastating. Summer signaled for the check, ready to leave before the envy and loneliness could overwhelm her completely. She'd take the salmon home, pretend she might eat it later, and spend another evening alone in her penthouse apartment with only her racing thoughts for company. But before the waiter could bring her bill, something unexpected happened. The little girl with the pigtails was suddenly standing beside her table, holding a small stuffed elephant, looking up at Summer with curious, fearless eyes. "Excuse me," the little girl said, her voice clear and confident in the way only young ones who haven't learned fear can manage. "Are you eating all by yourself?" Summer froze, unsure how to respond. Through her sunglasses, she glanced past the girl to see her father standing a few feet away, his expression apologetic but not stopping his daughter. He was tall, maybe late 30s, wearing work clothes marked with paint stains and sawdust. His hands showed the evidence of manual labor, calloused and strong, so different from the soft, manicured hands of the executives she usually dealt with. "I am," Summer finally managed, her voice rougher than intended. "But that's okay." The little girl tilted her head, considering this response with the seriousness of someone much older. "My daddy says nobody should eat alone because food tastes better when you share it with friends. Do you have any friends?" The directness of the question, delivered without any malice or judgment, hit Summer harder than any pitying look ever had. Out of the mouths of the young and innocent came the truths adults learned to dance around. "Not really," Summer admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "Not anymore." The girl's face crumpled with concern. She held out the stuffed elephant, pressing it into Summer's hands before Summer could protest. "You can borrow Mr. Trunk. He's very good at being a friend. He never gets mad, and he's an excellent listener." Summer looked down at the worn elephant, clearly beloved and frequently hugged, and felt something crack open inside her chest. When was the last time someone had offered her something so pure, so freely given, without expecting anything in return? "I couldn't take your elephant," Summer said softly, trying to hand it back. "It's just for while you eat," the girl insisted. "So you're not lonely. Daddy and I are eating here too, but we could sit with you if you want." Daddy says it's always nice to make new friends, especially people who look sad. Before Summer could respond, the father approached, his hand gentle on his daughter's shoulder. "Rosie, you can't just invite yourself to someone's table," he said, but his eyes were kind when they met Summer's. "I'm sorry if she's bothering you." "She's not," Summer heard herself say, and realized it was true. For the first time in months, someone was treating her like a person rather than a patient or a CEO or a problem to be managed. This girl, this Rosie, saw her simply as someone who might need a friend. The man extended his hand. "I'm Hudson Vaughn. This is my daughter Rosie. She has a gift for spotting people who could use some company." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Summer shook his hand, feeling the rough warmth of it against her own cold fingers. Summer Holt. Hudson's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Of course, he knew the name. Anyone in the tech industry or business world knew Holt Digital Solutions. But instead of the usual change in demeanor, the way people either became overly deferential or tried too hard to impress her, Hudson simply smiled. "Would you mind if we joined you?" he asked. "Rosie's right that food does taste better with company, and our table over there suddenly seems very far away." Summer should have said no, should have maintained the walls she'd built so carefully. But something about Hudson's genuine smile and Rosie's innocent concern made those walls feel less necessary, less protective, and more like a prison. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it. Hudson helped Rosie into the chair beside Summer, while he took the seat across from them. A waiter appeared, efficiently moving their place settings and menus. Rosie immediately launched into an animated explanation of why the chicken fingers were the best thing on the menu, even though her daddy always tried to make her eat vegetables. "Vegetables are important," Hudson said with practiced patience, clearly having had this conversation many times before. "So are chicken fingers," Rosie countered with impressive logic. "They make you happy, and being happy is important too. Right, Miss Summer?" Summer found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. "I think your daughter might be wise beyond her years. She definitely keeps me on my toes," Hudson agreed, his eyes crinkling with affection as he looked at Rosie. "We come here every Tuesday. It's our special dinner night." "Because Tuesdays are hard," Rosie explained matter-of-factly. "That's when Mommy died. 3 years ago on a Tuesday. So now, we make Tuesdays special instead of sad. Daddy says we get to choose what days mean." The casual way Rosie mentioned her mother's death, as if it were simply another fact about the world, left Summer momentarily speechless. Hudson caught her expression and offered a small, understanding smile. "Rosie's learned to talk about her mother openly," he said quietly. "We've found it's healthier than pretending the sadness isn't there." Summer looked at this man, this single father, who had turned the day of his greatest loss into a celebration with his daughter, and felt something shift inside her. Here was someone who understood grief, who had faced devastating loss, and somehow found a way to keep living, keep loving, keep showing up for Tuesday dinners. "I'm sorry for your loss," Summer said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Hudson nodded his thanks. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. The question is what we do with the turns we're given." Rosie, with the attention span typical of her age, had already moved on to examining Summer's scarf with open curiosity. "Is that silk?" "It's very pretty. My mommy used to wear pretty scarves too." Summer's hand instinctively went to her head, a protective gesture she'd developed. "Thank you. I wear them because I lost my hair." "Did you lose it like Daddy loses his keys?" Rosie asked innocently. "Maybe we can help you find it." Hudson gently corrected her. "I think Miss Summer means her hair fell out, sweetheart. Sometimes that happens when people are sick." Rosie's eyes went wide with understanding, but there was no fear or revulsion in them, only concern. "Are you very sick? Is that why you're sad?" The simple, direct questions cut through all the corporate euphemisms and careful language Summer had grown accustomed to. No one at her company asked if she was sick anymore. They asked about her prognosis, her treatment schedule, her ability to fulfill her duties. As if she were a machine, being repaired, rather than a person fighting for her life. "Yes," Summer said, finding liberation in the honesty. "I have cancer. I'm going through treatment, and today I got some good news. The treatment is working, but I didn't have anyone to celebrate with." Rosie's face lit up with genuine joy. "That's wonderful news. We should definitely celebrate. Daddy, can we get the chocolate cake? The one with the sparkly candles? We should definitely celebrate." Hudson looked at Summer questioningly. "Only if Miss Summer wants to. We don't want to intrude on her evening." But Summer realized she did want it. Wanted this unexpected kindness, this uncomplicated human connection. For months, she'd been drowning in isolation, convinced that her illness had made her untouchable. Yet here was this girl and her father, offering friendship without hesitation or pity. "I would love that," Summer said, her voice thick with emotion she no longer tried to hide. "I really would." Over the next 3 weeks, Tuesday dinners at the garden terrace became sacred. Summer found herself looking forward to them with an anticipation she hadn't felt about anything in months. Hudson and Rosie had a way of making her feel normal, not like a cancer patient or a CEO, just like Summer. Rosie was endlessly entertaining, bringing drawings she'd made at school to show Summer, explaining elaborate stories about her stuffed animals, and asking questions with the fearless curiosity of someone who hadn't learned that some topics were supposed to be off limits. She wanted to know everything about Summer's company, convinced that running a tech business meant Summer spent all day playing video games. Hudson was different from anyone Summer had ever known. He ran a small painting and restoration business, specializing in historic homes. His hands were always marked with the evidence of his work, paint under his fingernails, calluses from holding brushes and tools. He spoke about his projects with quiet pride, about breathing new life into old buildings, preserving beauty that might otherwise be lost. There was something meditative about the way he described his work, so different from the aggressive, competitive world of tech startups and market disruption that Summer inhabited. Hudson created and restored. He didn't tear down to build up. He found what was valuable and worth saving, then dedicated himself to saving it. Their conversations during those Tuesday dinners ranged from light to profound. Hudson told stories about Rosie's mother, Jessica, who had been a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could fill a room. He spoke of her not with the raw grief of fresh loss, but with the warm remembrance of someone who had learned to carry love and sorrow together. Jessica had complications during delivery. He explained one evening while Rosie was occupied with coloring at the table. They'd had minutes to say goodbye, minutes to meet their daughter and realize Jessica wouldn't be there to watch her grow up. The doctors had given them a choice: save the mother or save the baby, and Jessica had made the decision before anyone could stop her. Summer watched Hudson's face as he told the story, saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes grew distant with memory. But there was no bitterness in his voice, only a profound sadness mixed with gratitude for the time they'd had. "I was angry for a long time," Hudson admitted. "Angry at Jessica for choosing to leave me, angry at the universe for the unfairness of it. But then I'd look at Rosie, and I'd see Jessica in every smile, every gesture. Jessica didn't leave me. She gave me the greatest gift she could. She gave me our daughter." Summer found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, not even the therapist her oncologist had recommended. She described the isolation of her diagnosis, how quickly people had disappeared from her life once they knew, friends who stopped calling because they didn't know what to say, colleagues who treated her differently, as if cancer were catching, or her mortality might somehow affect quarterly projections. She told Hudson about lying awake at 3 in the morning, terrified not just of dying, but of dying alone, of leaving no real mark on the world beyond a company that would continue without her, probably better without her. She'd built an empire, but had no one to leave it to. No legacy beyond profit margins and market share. Hudson listened without trying to fix anything or offer empty platitudes. He simply heard her, acknowledged her fear, and reminded her that she was still here, still fighting, still living. "You know what Jessica told me the day before she died?" Hudson said one evening. She said, "Don't waste your life preparing for death. Living and dying happen simultaneously. Every moment of every day. The question is which one you're going to focus on." Those words stayed with Summer long after she left the restaurant that night. She'd spent 6 months focused entirely on dying, on the cancer, on the treatments and scans and prognosis. She'd forgotten how to focus on living. Rosie had adopted Summer with the wholehearted devotion only a 7-year-old could manage. She saved her best drawings for Summer, brought her favorite books to share, and insisted on teaching Summer the elaborate handshake she'd invented. The girl had declared Summer her very best grown-up friend, and took this responsibility seriously, checking in on how Summer was feeling, reminding her to eat, and offering Mr. Trunk for comfort when Summer mentioned having a particularly difficult treatment. One Tuesday, Summer arrived at the restaurant to find Rosie waiting with barely contained excitement. She'd made something special, a bracelet woven from colorful threads, with beads that spelled out brave. "It's for you," Rosie announced, carefully tying it around Summer's wrist. "Because you're the bravest person I know. You're fighting the bad cells, and you come to dinner, even when you don't feel good, and you never pretend to smile when you're sad. That's very brave." Summer looked at this bracelet, made with such care by such small hands, and felt tears streaming down her face before she could stop them. Not tears of sadness, but of something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Connection. Belonging. Love. Hudson reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. "You're not alone anymore, Summer. You know that, right? We're here. We're not going anywhere." Summer looked into his eyes and saw he meant it. This wasn't pity or obligation. This was genuine care, the kind she'd been starving for without even realizing it. Hudson and Rosie had become her family, not through blood or legal bonds, but through the simple act of showing up, week after week, seeing her at her worst, and choosing to stay. "I don't know how this happened," Summer whispered. "How you two became so important to me so quickly." Hudson smiled, that gentle smile that had become so familiar, so comforting. "Sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. They're just discovered. We discovered you, Summer, and we're not letting you face this alone." As the evening wound down, and they prepared to leave, Rosie took Summer's hand. "Will you come to my art show at school next week? It's on Thursday. I made a painting of our Tuesday dinners. You're in it." Summer looked at Hudson, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd love to have you there, if you're feeling up to it." Summer realized she would move mountains to be there. These Tuesday dinners had become the highlight of her week, the thing she held on to during the difficult treatment days. But being invited into other parts of their lives, into Rosie's world beyond the restaurant, felt like being handed a key to something precious. "I'll be there," Summer promised. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." As Summer drove home that night, the bracelet on her wrist, catching the streetlights, she realized something had fundamentally changed. She was still sick. The cancer was still there, still requiring treatment, still carrying no guarantees, but she was no longer drowning in isolation. Hudson and Rosie had thrown her a lifeline without even realizing it, and she'd grabbed hold with both hands. For the first time since her diagnosis, Summer went to sleep thinking not about death, but about life. About art shows and Tuesday dinners and the sound of Rosie's laughter. About Hudson's steady presence and the way he looked at her, not as a patient or a CEO, but simply as Summer, a woman worth knowing, worth saving, worth loving. Rosie's art show was held in the gymnasium of Oakwood Elementary, the walls transformed into a gallery of imagination and innocence. Crayon drawings of families, watercolor sunsets, and clay sculptures lined the display tables, while proud parents milled about with cameras and praise. Summer arrived early, wearing a deep blue silk scarf that Rosie had declared her favorite during their last dinner. The chemotherapy had left her exhausted that week, the side effects more intense than previous rounds, but she'd promised Rosie she would be there. Some promises mattered more than physical comfort. She found Rosie's display near the center of the room, and what she saw made her breath catch. The painting showed 3 figures at a table, rendered in the bold, confident strokes of someone who saw the world in primary colors and absolute truths. A man with kind eyes, a little girl with wild curly hair, and a woman wearing a beautiful blue scarf. Above them, Rosie had painted the words, "My Tuesday family," in careful letters. "Do you like it?" Rosie appeared at her elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. She wore a dress covered in paint stains that no amount of washing had removed, evidence of an artist who threw herself completely into her work. "I love it," Summer said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." Rosie beamed with pride. "That's you in the blue scarf. I painted you smiling because you smile more now than when we first met. Daddy says you're blooming like flowers do in spring after a long winter." Summer knelt down, ignoring the way the movement made her dizzy, so she could look Rosie in the eyes. "Thank you for including me in your family. You and your dad have given me something I didn't know I needed." "Love," Rosie said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Everyone needs love. That's what makes people bloom." Hudson found them there, Summer still kneeling, holding Rosie's hands, both of them with tears in their eyes. He helped Summer to her feet, his hand lingering at her elbow, steadying her. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, concern evident in his voice. "Better than okay," Summer said, looking between him and Rosie. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." After the art show, Hudson suggested they skip the garden terrace and come to his house for dinner instead. Rosie had been begging to show Summer her room, her extensive stuffed animal collection, and the treehouse Hudson had built in their backyard. Summer agreed without hesitation, curious to see the home that had shaped these 2 people who had become so essential to her life. Hudson's house was a modest craftsman in an older neighborhood, the kind of place that prioritized character over square footage. The porch had a swing, the front yard had a garden, and the whole place radiated warmth and care. Inside, the walls were painted in soft, welcoming colors, professional work that showcased Hudson's skill. Family photos covered every surface, many featuring a beautiful woman with Rosie's eyes and Hudson's smile. "That's Jessica," Hudson said, noticing Summer's gaze. "I want Rosie to grow up surrounded by her mother's presence. She should know the woman who gave everything for her." Rosie dragged Summer on a comprehensive tour, showing her every important location in the house. The kitchen where they made pancakes on Saturday mornings, the living room where they built blanket forts, the shelf in her room dedicated to Mr. Trunk's extended family of stuffed animals, each with their own elaborate backstory. "And this is where Daddy reads to me every night," Rosie said, pointing to a rocking chair in the corner of her room. "He does all the voices. Sometimes he makes me laugh so hard my tummy hurts." Summer watched Hudson in this space, saw how naturally he inhabited fatherhood, how every corner of this home reflected his dedication to raising his daughter with love and intention. There was no staff, no hired help, just a man who had learned to braid hair and pack school lunches and make a home out of grief and determination. While Rosie was washing her hands before dinner, Hudson pulled Summer aside in the hallway. The narrow space put them closer than they'd ever been, close enough that Summer could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I need to tell you something," Hudson said, his voice low and serious. "These past few weeks, having you in our lives, it's changed something for me. For both of us. Rosie talks about you constantly. She draws pictures for you at school. She's asked me twice if you can come to her birthday party next month." Summer's heart raced, though whether from Hudson's proximity or his words, she couldn't say. "I'd love to come to her birthday party." "That's not what I'm trying to say," Hudson continued, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of nervous frustration. "I'm trying to say that it's not just Rosie who looks forward to Tuesdays. I spend all week thinking about seeing you, about the way you laugh at Rosie's stories, about how you've gotten stronger, more vibrant, like you're remembering how to live again. Summer, I'm falling for you. I've probably been falling since that first night when you let us sit at your table. Summer felt as if all the air had left her lungs. She'd felt the connection between them growing, had noticed the way Hudson's touch lingered, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. But hearing him say it out loud, making it real and undeniable, terrified her. "Hudson, I have cancer," she said, as if he could have possibly forgotten. "I'm in the middle of treatment. I don't know if I'll be in remission next year, or if the cancer will come back. I can't give you guarantees. I can't promise you a future." Hudson reached out, cupping her face gently with both hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Summer, nobody gets guarantees. Jessica and I thought we had a lifetime ahead of us. We made plans, talked about the future, imagined growing old together, and then we had hours. Not years, not decades. Hours. I learned that the only moment that matters is this one, right now. And right now, I want to be with you. I want to fight alongside you. I want to love you for however long we get." "But Rosie," Summer whispered, "if something happens to me, if the cancer wins, she'll lose someone else she cares about. I can't do that to her. I can't let her get attached and then leave her." "Rosie is stronger than you think," Hudson said gently. "She's already lost her mother. She understands that loving someone means accepting the risk of loss. But she also knows that love is worth it anyway. She's teaching me that every day. And right now, she's teaching you too." Summer wanted to argue, to list all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, why Hudson should protect himself and his daughter from the inevitable pain her illness would cause. But standing there in his hallway, feeling his hands warm against her face, seeing nothing but acceptance and hope in his eyes, she couldn't remember any of those reasons. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," Hudson said. "But I'm more scared of letting you walk away without telling you how I feel. Of missing out on whatever time we could have together, because I was too afraid to take the risk." "I don't know how to do this," Summer said, echoing the fear that had been holding her back. "I've never been good at relationships, even when I was healthy. I don't know how to be someone's partner, how to be part of a family." "Neither did I when Rosie was born," Hudson said, smiling softly. "But I learned. We'll learn together. One day at a time. One Tuesday at a time. If that's all you can handle." Rosie's voice called from the kitchen. "Daddy, Miss Summer, I made the table all pretty. Come see." Hudson's hands dropped from Summer's face, but he caught one of her hands in his, intertwining their fingers. "What do you say, Summer? Are you willing to try? To see where this goes?" Summer looked at their joined hands, at the way they fit together despite being so different. His large and calloused, hers smaller and marked with bruises from IV needles. She thought about the painting in Rosie's classroom, about being part of a Tuesday family. She thought about all the reasons she should say no, should protect them from her uncertain future. And then she thought about Jessica's words that Hudson had shared, about not wasting life preparing for death, about choosing to focus on living instead of dying. "Yes," Summer said, the word feeling like the bravest thing she'd ever said. "I want to try. I want this. I want you and Rosie. I want to be part of your Tuesday family." Hudson's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. Summer melted into the embrace, feeling safe for the first time in months, feeling chosen, feeling loved. "We should go see what Rosie's done to the dining room," Hudson murmured against her hair. "Fair warning, it probably involves every candle in the house." They walked into the dining room hand in hand to find Rosie had indeed lit what seemed like dozens of tea candles, arranged around a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread. She'd used her nicest plastic plates and had even attempted to fold the napkins into shapes, though they looked more like crumpled paper than anything decorative. "It's perfect," Summer said, meaning it completely. Rosie grinned. "I wanted to make it special because Daddy told me this morning that he was going to tell you he loves you today. I said it was about time because you've been looking at each other with googly eyes for weeks." Hudson laughed, embarrassed. "Rosie, we talked about keeping secrets." "But she said yes, right?" Rosie looked between them anxiously. "She's going to stay with us." Summer sat down, pulling Rosie into her lap, grateful when the girl settled against her, without hesitation. "I'm going to stay," Summer promised, "for as long as I can. Is that okay with you?" Rosie wrapped her arms around Summer's neck. "More than okay. I prayed for you. You know. Before we even met you, I asked God to send Daddy someone who needed us as much as we needed them. And then there you were, sitting all alone with your sad eyes. I knew you were the answer." Summer held this remarkable little girl, this 7-year-old who had seen through all her defenses and decided she was worth saving. Over Rosie's shoulder, she met Hudson's eyes and saw her own wonder reflected back at her. She had come to the garden terrace, expecting nothing more than a meal eaten in solitude. Instead, she'd found a family, found love, found a reason to fight that had nothing to do with business empires or personal achievement, and everything to do with being present for Tuesday dinners and art shows, and this feeling of belonging. The cancer was still there, still requiring treatment, still casting shadows over her future. But for the first time since her diagnosis, Summer felt something stronger than the fear. She felt hope. Not hope that she would definitely survive, but hope that whatever time she had left would be filled with love and connection and moments like this one. That night, after dinner, and after Hudson drove her home, Summer stood in her penthouse apartment that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like an expensive cage. She looked at the city lights spread out below her, at the physical evidence of her success, and realized none of it mattered compared to what she'd found in a modest craftsman house with a man and his daughter who had chosen to love her despite everything. She touched the bracelet Rosie had made, the one that spelled brave, and made a decision. She was done hiding, done protecting herself from pain by refusing to let anyone close. Hudson was right. Nobody got guarantees. The only moment that mattered was now. And now, she was choosing to live. Really live. With all the risk and vulnerability and terrifying possibility that entailed. Summer's transformation didn't go unnoticed at Holt Digital Solutions. She started delegating more, trusting her executive team with decisions she would have micromanaged before. She left the office at reasonable hours instead of working until midnight. She took Tuesdays completely off, marking them as unavailable in her calendar without explanation. Most significantly, she smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached her eyes and lingered even during difficult meetings. Her assistant, Patricia, commented on it one morning. "You seem different lately, happier. The treatment must be going well." "It is," Summer confirmed, "but that's not the only reason." She didn't elaborate, wasn't ready to expose her relationship with Hudson and Rosie to corporate scrutiny. That part of her life felt sacred, separate from the cutthroat world of business acquisitions and shareholder demands. She wanted to protect it for as long as possible. But secrets in the corporate world have a short lifespan. Alec Jennings, the chief financial officer and the most senior member of her board, had been watching Summer's behavior with growing concern. He'd been with the company since the early days, had helped Summer navigate her first major funding round, and considered himself not just a colleague but a mentor. When Summer's cancer diagnosis came, he'd been supportive but pragmatic, already planning for succession scenarios. Alec had his own vision for Holt Digital Solutions, one that involved a merger with a larger tech conglomerate that would make everyone involved very wealthy. Summer had consistently refused to consider selling, too attached to maintaining independence and her vision for the company. But a sick CEO with uncertain longevity made for excellent leverage in changing her mind. He'd hired a private investigator when Summer's behavior started changing, justifying it as protecting the company's interests. The reports that landed on his desk painted a picture that both surprised and concerned him. Summer Holt, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, spending increasing amounts of time with Hudson Vaughn, a working-class single father who ran a small painting business, dining at his modest home, attending elementary school functions, forming an obvious attachment to his daughter. To Alec's calculating mind, the conclusion was clear and disturbing. Hudson Vaughn had targeted a vulnerable woman, a cancer patient with no family and considerable wealth. It was a classic con, approaching someone at their lowest point, offering companionship and affection, then slowly positioning himself to benefit financially. Alex scheduled an emergency board meeting, presenting his findings with the grave seriousness of someone exposing a corporate threat. The board members, most of whom had never met Summer's new friends, absorbed the information with varying degrees of shock and concern. "We need to intervene," Alec argued. "Summer isn't thinking clearly. The cancer, the treatments, they're affecting her judgment. This man is obviously taking advantage of her vulnerability. We have a fiduciary duty to protect her and, by extension, the company." Not everyone agreed. Sarah Wilkins, the head of human resources and one of the few women on the board, pushed back. "We don't actually know that he's taking advantage. From these reports, it looks like they're just spending time together. Since when is friendship a corporate concern?" "It's more than friendship," Alex said coldly. "And when our CEO is dying and making questionable personal decisions, it absolutely becomes a corporate concern. What happens when he convinces her to change her will? To leave him controlling interest in the company? We'd be looking at a hostile takeover from someone with no business experience and every motivation to liquidate assets." The fear-mongering worked. By the end of the meeting, the board had authorized Alec to speak with Summer, to express their concerns and strongly recommend she distance herself from Hudson Vaughn, for her own protection, for the company's protection. Alec waited until the end of a particularly long day. Catching Summer as she was preparing to leave the office early for another Tuesday dinner, he knocked on her door frame, his expression grave with manufactured concern. "Summer, do you have a moment? There's something we need to discuss." Summer glanced at her watch but nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Make it quick. I have plans." "That's actually what I need to talk to you about," Alex said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Your plans. Specifically, your relationship with Hudson Vaughn." Summer's expression hardened instantly. "My personal life is none of your business, Alec." "Under normal circumstances, I would agree," Alec said smoothly. "But these aren't normal circumstances. You're the CEO of this company. You're fighting a serious illness, and you're making decisions that could have significant consequences. The board is concerned." "The board," Summer repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You took my personal relationships to the board?" "We had to," Alec insisted. "Summer, I care about you. We all do. But we're worried that this man, Hudson Vaughn, isn't what he appears to be. He approached you during a vulnerable time. He's inserted himself and his daughter into your life very quickly, and he stands to benefit enormously from a relationship with a wealthy, terminally ill woman." "I'm not terminally ill," Summer snapped. "My last scans showed improvement, and Hudson hasn't asked me for anything. Not money, not favors, nothing." "Not yet," Alex said. "But these things escalate. First, it's emotional support, then it's moving in together, then it's marriage and access to your assets. Summer, I've seen this pattern before. Vulnerable people being taken advantage of by opportunists." Summer stood, her hands pressed flat against her desk to stop them from shaking. "You don't know anything about Hudson, about what he's given me. I know he's a single father struggling to make ends meet with a small business that barely breaks even." Alec countered, standing as well. "I know he has every motivation to secure financial stability for himself and his daughter. I know that you're lonely and scared, and probably grateful for any human connection. Those are exactly the conditions predators look for." "Get out," Summer said, her voice shaking with rage. "Get out of my office right now." "Summer, please listen," Alex said, his tone shifting to something softer, more manipulative. "I'm trying to protect you. If you continue this relationship, the board will have to consider whether you're fit to continue as CEO. If your judgment is compromised to this degree, if you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic, we have a responsibility to the company and shareholders to step in." The threat landed like a physical blow. "You're threatening to remove me from my own company." We're threatening to protect you from making catastrophic mistakes, Alec corrected. End the relationship with Hudson Vaughn. Focus on your treatment and on the business. Prove to us that you can still think clearly, or the board will have no choice but to take action. We could claim diminished capacity due to your illness and treatments. We could argue that you need to step aside temporarily for your own good. Summer felt the walls closing in, the same trapped feeling she'd experienced during her darkest days after diagnosis. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked for, being used as leverage to control her personal life. I love him, she said quietly. I love him and his daughter. They've given me a reason to keep fighting. You're asking me to give up the best thing that's happened to me since the diagnosis. I'm asking you to be smart, Alex said. If he really loves you, he'll understand. He'll wait until you're in remission, until you're thinking clearly. But continuing this relationship now, while you're vulnerable and while the board has concerns, will only hurt you. It could hurt him too. We have lawyers, Summer. If we decide he's taking advantage of you, we can make his life very difficult. We can investigate his business, audit his taxes, make it impossible for him to get contracts. Is that what you want? The threat extended beyond just Summer now. They would go after Hudson, destroy his livelihood, all to maintain control over her and the company. Summer thought of Hudson's modest house, his small business that he'd built with his own hands, Rosie's innocent joy. They would crush all of it without hesitation. You can't do this, Summer whispered. We can, and we will, Alex said firmly. For your own good. End it. Summer. End it now. Cleanly. Before this gets uglier than it needs to be. Focus on beating the cancer. Focus on the company. Let this man and his daughter go back to their simple life before you complicate it further. After Alec left, Summer sat in her office as darkness fell outside, the city lights blinking on one by one. She had two choices, both impossible. Fight for her relationship with Hudson and Rosie, risking everything she'd built and potentially destroying Hudson's business in the crossfire. Or end it, return to her isolated existence. Protect them from the corporate warfare that would inevitably follow. She picked up her phone a dozen times, wanting to call Hudson, to hear his voice, to ask him what to do. But she already knew what he would say. He would tell her to fight. He would say they'd face it together. He would put himself and Rosie directly in the line of fire. Summer couldn't allow that. She'd already cost them enough, inserting herself into their peaceful life, letting Rosie get attached, giving Hudson hope for a future that might not exist. The kindest thing, the most loving thing, would be to let them go, to push them away before the board could hurt them, to sacrifice her own happiness to protect theirs. With shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, Summer typed out a text message to Hudson. I can't do this anymore. The relationship was a mistake. Please don't contact me again. I'm sorry. She hit send before she could change her mind, then turned off her phone and sat in the darkness of her office, feeling her heart break into pieces that she wasn't sure could ever be put back together. Hudson stared at the message on his phone, reading it over and over until the words blurred together. The restaurant around him faded into background noise as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. I can't do this anymore. The relationship was a mistake. Please don't contact me again. I'm sorry. Across the table at the garden terrace, Rosie was coloring a welcome back card she'd made for Summer, completely unaware that Summer wouldn't be coming, that she would never be coming again. Is Miss Summer running late? Rosie asked, looking up with her mother's eyes, full of trust and innocent expectation. Hudson couldn't find words. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes love wasn't enough, that sometimes people left not because they wanted to, but because they felt they had to? Sweetheart, he began, his voice cracking. Miss Summer isn't coming tonight. Rosie's face fell. Is she sick? Did the cancer get worse? We should go see her. We should bring her soup. That's what you do when people are sick. She's not sick, Hudson said. though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Something had happened. Summer wouldn't just end things like this. Not through a cold text message, not after everything they'd shared. She just needs some space right now. But why? Rosie's eyes filled with tears. Did we do something wrong? Did I do something wrong? No, baby. No. Hudson pulled his daughter into his lap, holding her tight. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make complicated decisions that don't make sense to anyone else. But it didn't make sense to Hudson either. 3 days ago, Summer had been at his house, laughing at one of Rosie's stories, fitting into their life as if she'd always been there. She'd kissed him goodbye at the door with tears in her eyes, whispering that she'd never been happier. Something had changed drastically, and Hudson needed to know what. He tried calling, but the calls went straight to voicemail. He sent texts asking if they could talk, if he could at least understand what had changed. All went unanswered. He drove by her penthouse building, but the doorman, clearly instructed, told him Miss Holt wasn't accepting visitors. For 3 days, Hudson moved through his work like a ghost, painting walls without seeing them, his hands completing familiar motions while his mind spun in circles. Rosie had stopped asking questions, but had gone quiet in a way that broke his heart. She carried Mr. Trunk everywhere again, something she hadn't done in months, seeking comfort from the worn stuffed elephant because the human comfort she'd grown to count on had disappeared. On the 4th day, Hudson made a decision. He couldn't let this end without at least trying to understand, without fighting for what they'd found together. He called his sister to watch Rosie and drove to Holt Digital Solutions, a gleaming tower in the financial district that represented everything he wasn't. The receptionist was polite but firm. I'm sorry, sir. Miss Holt isn't taking meetings today. If you'd like to leave your name and contact information, I can pass it along. Tell her it's Hudson Vaughn, he said. Tell her I just need 5 minutes. The receptionist made a call, had a hushed conversation, then looked at him with practiced sympathy. I'm sorry, Mr. Vaughn. Miss Holt asked me to tell you that she said everything she needs to say. She wishes you well, but she's requested that you don't come back. The formal rejection, delivered through an intermediary, felt like a slap. This wasn't the Summer he knew, the woman who'd held Rosie in her lap and promised to stay as long as she could. Something was terribly wrong. Hudson turned to leave and nearly collided with an older man in an expensive suit who had just stepped off the elevator. The man looked at Hudson with cold assessment, taking in his work clothes and paint-stained hands with obvious disdain. Mr. Vaughn, the man said, though Hudson hadn't introduced himself. I'm Alec Jennings, CFO of Holt Digital Solutions. I wonder if we might have a word. They ended up in a conference room overlooking the city, the kind of space designed to intimidate with its size and its view. Alec settled into a chair with the confidence of someone who owned the room and gestured for Hudson to sit. I'll be direct, Alec said. Summer has decided to focus on her health and her company. The relationship with you and your daughter, while I'm sure well-intentioned on your part, was a distraction she can't afford. She's asked me to make certain things clear. She could tell me herself, Hudson said, anger finally breaking through his confusion. She doesn't want to see you, Alec said bluntly. She's realized that the relationship was a mistake brought on by the vulnerability of her illness. She needs you to respect her decision and move on with your life. Hudson studied the man across from him, noting the way he spoke about Summer as if she were a business asset rather than a person. Did you threaten her? Did you force her to end things? Alec's expression didn't change. I advised her of certain realities. The board has concerns about her judgment, given her illness and her sudden attachment to someone from such a different background. We simply helped her see reason. You threatened her, Hudson repeated, standing up. You threatened to take her company away if she didn't end things with me. We threatened to protect her from making decisions she would regret, Alec corrected. Tell me, Mr. Vaughn, what exactly were your intentions with Summer? A wealthy, sick woman with no family? Surely you can see how that looks from the outside. The implication hit Hudson like a punch. You think I was using her for money? I think you're a single father with a struggling business and a daughter to raise. I think Summer represented financial security. I'm not judging you for that. I'm simply saying that the board, and Summer herself, have decided this relationship isn't appropriate. Hudson leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. I love her. I love her strength, and her vulnerability, and the way she lights up when Rosie tells her stories. I love how she's learning to hope again. I don't give a damn about her money. I never asked her for anything, except to let us be there for her. How noble, Alex said dryly. But the decision is made. If you continue to pursue this, if you show up here again, or contact Summer, or make any attempt to insinuate yourself back into her life, we will take action. We have lawyers who can make things very difficult for you and your business. Do you understand? Hudson understood perfectly. He was being warned off, threatened with the kind of legal and financial warfare he had no resources to fight. But more than that, he understood that Summer had sacrificed their relationship to protect him from exactly this. She'd pushed him away to save him from the board's retaliation. Does Summer know you're here? Hudson asked. Does she know you're threatening me? Summer is being protected from her own poor judgment, Alex said. That's all you need to know. Now, I suggest you return to your life and let Summer return to hers. Forget this ever happened. Hudson left the building feeling sick. He sat in his truck for a long time, watching people come and go from the gleaming tower, all of them moving with purpose and confidence in a world he didn't belong to. The worst part wasn't the threats, or the implication that he'd been using Summer. The worst part was knowing she was up there somewhere, alone and probably heartbroken, having chosen to endure that pain to protect him and Rosie. She'd made the sacrifice she thought was necessary, and Hudson had no way to tell her she didn't have to, that he would fight the entire board if necessary. That love was worth the risk. He drove home in a daze, relief flooding through him when he saw Rosie safely playing in the yard with his sister. But when Rosie ran to him asking if he'd seen Miss Summer, if she was coming back, Hudson had to choke back his own tears as he shook his head. That night, after Rosie finally cried herself to sleep clutching Mr. Trunk, Hudson sat in his workshop surrounded by half-finished projects. He picked up a piece of wood, feeling its grain, and thought about what Summer had taught him, that sometimes the most broken things, properly restored, became stronger than they'd ever been before. She thought she was protecting them by pushing them away, but she'd forgotten what she should have learned by now. That real family didn't give up when things got hard. That love meant fighting for each other, not running away to face battles alone. Hudson didn't know how he was going to fix this, how he was going to get past the corporate walls and the board's threats, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't giving up on Summer Holt, not now, not ever. She'd saved him and Rosie from a half-lived life. Now it was time to return the favor, no matter what it cost. For 6 days, Hudson respected Summer's stated wishes while planning his next move. He researched Holt Digital Solutions, learning everything he could about its structure, its board members, and Alec Jennings in particular. He spoke with a lawyer friend who confirmed what he already suspected. The board's threats had legal weight, and fighting them could bankrupt him. But Hudson had learned something crucial from losing Jessica. When you loved someone, really loved them, you didn't calculate the cost. You simply acted. You fought. You showed up, even when showing up seemed impossible. Rosie had grown quieter with each passing day. She still went to school, still did her homework, still helped him make dinner, but the light had gone out of her, replaced by a sadness that made her seem years older. She'd stopped asking when Summer was coming back, which somehow hurt worse than the questions had. On the 7th day, Hudson made his decision. He dressed Rosie in her favorite yellow dress, the one she'd worn to her art show, and told her they were going on an important mission. Are we going to see Miss Summer? Rosie asked, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in a week. We're going to try, Hudson said honestly. But I need you to be brave, okay? Even braver than usual. They drove to Summer's building, an exclusive, high-rise, in the most expensive part of the city. The doorman recognized Hudson from his previous attempt and stepped forward with practiced authority. "Sir, I've already told you that Miss Holt doesn't wish to receive visitors. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll need to call security." "Please," Hudson said, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "Just call up to her apartment. Tell her Hudson and Rosie are here. Tell her we're not leaving until she agrees to talk to us." "I can't do that, sir," the doorman said, though his expression showed sympathy. "I have strict instructions." Rosie tugged on the doorman's jacket, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Miss Summer is sick. She has cancer. We love her, and she's all alone up there, and nobody should be alone when they're sick. Please, mister, please just tell her we're here. Tell her we miss her." The doorman's professional facade cracked slightly. He looked between Hudson's determined face and Rosie's pleading expression and sighed. "Wait here." He walked to his desk and made a call, speaking quietly into the phone. When he returned, he shook his head. "I'm sorry. Miss Holt says she appreciates your concern, but asks that you respect her privacy. She doesn't wish to see anyone today." Hudson had expected this. He led Rosie to the small plaza area in front of the building, where a decorative fountain provided seating. They sat down on the edge, and Hudson helped Rosie climb up to stand on the fountain's ledge, making her more visible from the upper floors. "What are we doing, Daddy?" Rosie asked. "We're waiting," Hudson said. "And we're letting Miss Summer know we're not going anywhere. That we're here for her, even if she thinks she doesn't want us to be." Rosie understood immediately. She cupped her small hands around her mouth and called up toward the building. "Miss Summer, it's me, Rosie. We're here. We miss you." Her voice was small against the city noise, but it carried with the clarity of a young one's conviction. Hudson joined in, his deeper voice adding weight to their plea. "Summer, we're not leaving. We need to talk." People passing by stared at them. Some smiled sympathetically, others hurried past, embarrassed by the public display. But Hudson didn't care about the spectators. He cared only about the woman somewhere above them, who had sacrificed her own happiness to protect them. Rosie called out again, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please, Miss Summer, did we do something wrong? We can fix it. We can fix anything if you just talk to us." Inside her penthouse apartment 20 floors above, Summer heard their voices. She'd been sitting by the window for hours, unable to eat, or sleep, or think about anything except the choice she'd made. The text message she'd sent Hudson played on repeat in her mind, each word a fresh wound. Patricia had delivered updates from the office. The board was satisfied with her decision. Alec had personally commended her for being reasonable. Plans were moving forward for the merger he'd been pushing for months. Everything was returning to normal. Except nothing was normal. Nothing would ever be normal again. Summer had convinced herself she was doing the right thing, protecting Hudson and Rosie from the corporate warfare that would have destroyed their peaceful life. But sitting alone in her expensive apartment, she realized she'd made the same mistake her father figure Alec had made. She'd decided what was best for them without asking. She'd taken away their choice. When she heard Rosie's voice calling her name, small and desperate and refusing to give up, something inside Summer shattered. She wheeled herself to the window and looked down to see them in the plaza. Hudson standing with his hand on Rosie's shoulder. Rosie waving up at the building with frantic hope. They'd come for her, despite her rejection, despite the text message, despite every barrier she'd tried to put between them, they'd come. Because that's what family did. They showed up. They fought. They refused to accept abandonment as the final answer. Summer thought about all the board meetings she'd dominated, all the negotiations she'd won through sheer force of will. She'd built an empire by refusing to back down, by fighting for what she believed in. When had she forgotten how to fight for herself? For her own happiness? Alec had threatened to take her company if she didn't comply. Fine. Let him try. She'd built Holt Digital Solutions once. She could build something new if necessary. But Hudson and Rosie, they couldn't be rebuilt. They couldn't be replaced. They were once in a lifetime, and she'd been a fool to push them away. Summer grabbed her phone, her silk scarf, and her purse. She didn't bother with the elevator, knowing security would try to stop her if they got word she was leaving. Instead, she took the service elevator, the one the maintenance staff used, gambling that it wouldn't be monitored as closely. Her hands shook as she maneuvered her wheelchair through the building's back corridors. She'd never done this before, never had reason to learn the service routes, but determination carried her forward, past surprised staff members who were too shocked to stop her. She emerged from a side entrance into an alley, then pushed herself around the building toward the front plaza. Her arms ached from the effort, her body weak from the latest round of chemotherapy. But she pushed harder, driven by a need stronger than physical pain. When she rounded the corner and saw Hudson and Rosie still there, still waiting, still believing she might come, Summer felt tears streaming down her face. She called out, her voice rough with emotion, "Hudson, Rosie." They turned as one, their faces transforming from despair to disbelief to joy in the space of a heartbeat. Rosie broke free from her father's hand and ran to Summer, throwing herself into Summer's lap without hesitation, nearly tipping the wheelchair with the force of her embrace. You came. Rosie sobbed into Summer's shoulder. "I knew you would. I told Daddy you still loved us." Hudson reached them a moment later, kneeling beside the wheelchair, his hands framing Summer's tear-stained face. "Summer, what happened? Why did you push us away?" "I was trying to protect you," Summer said, the words tumbling out between sobs. "Alec and the board, they threatened to destroy your business if I didn't end things. They said they'd make your life impossible. I thought I was saving you from corporate warfare. I thought I was being selfless." "You were being an idiot," Hudson said, but his voice was gentle, filled with love rather than anger. "Summer, I don't need you to protect me. I need you to trust me to make my own choices, to fight my own battles alongside you." "They'll come after you," Summer warned. "Alec won't stop. The board will make things difficult." "Let them try," Hudson said fiercely. "I've faced worse than corporate lawyers and boardroom politics. I've buried the love of my life and learned to keep breathing. I've raised a daughter alone while building a business from nothing. I'm stronger than I look. Summer, we both are." Rosie pulled back from Summer's shoulder, her small face serious. "Miss Summer, you told me once that love means choosing each other every day. You said you chose us. Did you change your mind? Did you stop choosing?" The question, delivered with such innocent directness, cut to the heart of everything. Summer cupped Rosie's face with shaking hands. "I never stopped choosing you, sweetheart. I just forgot for a little while that choosing you meant being brave enough to fight for us. But I remember now. I'm done letting other people make decisions about my life. I'm done protecting myself from pain by refusing to let people close." She looked at Hudson, seeing the man who had first approached her in a restaurant because his daughter's instincts said she needed a friend, the man who had taught her that broken things could still be beautiful, still be whole. "I choose you," Summer said clearly. "I choose Rosie. I choose us. No matter what the board threatens. No matter what it costs. I'm done hiding." Hudson kissed her then, right there in the plaza in front of passing strangers and building security who had finally noticed the commotion. It was a kiss that tasted of salt tears and new beginnings, of second chances and stubborn hope. When they finally broke apart, Rosie was grinning through her tears. "Does this mean we can go back to our Tuesday dinners?" Summer laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Yes, baby. Tuesday dinners and Friday art shows and Sunday pancakes and every other day we can steal. But first, we need to go somewhere specific. We need to go back to where this all started." "The garden terrace," Hudson said, understanding immediately. "The garden terrace," Summer confirmed. "I need to face Alec. I need to make him understand that I'm not backing down. And I want to do it at the place where I first learned what it meant to be truly seen." They made their way to the restaurant, an unlikely trio that drew curious glances. The hostess at the garden terrace recognized them immediately, her face lighting up. "Your usual table?" she asked, as if no time had passed. as if the past week of heartbreak hadn't happened. "Please," Summer said. "And we might be expecting another guest. Someone who needs to learn an important lesson about what really matters." They settled at their corner table, the same one where Hudson and Rosie had first approached a lonely woman on what might have been one of her last good days. Summer felt the rightness of being back here, of coming full circle to the place where her life had truly begun. She pulled out her phone and composed a message to Alec, her fingers steady now with certainty. "I'm at the garden terrace. Come meet me. We need to talk about my future with the company and my future with Hudson. You don't get to decide either one. I do. If you want to challenge that, come face me in person. Otherwise, accept that things are changing, whether you like it or not." She hit send and then set her phone down, taking Hudson's hand on one side and Rosie's on the other. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, as a family, as partners, as people who had chosen love over fear. They didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes after Summer sent her message, Alec Jennings strode into the garden terrace like a man preparing for battle. His expensive suit was immaculate, his expression controlled, but Summer could see the anger simmering beneath his professional facade. The hostess tried to approach him, but he brushed past her, his eyes locked on Summer's table. Other diners looked up at the disturbance, sensing drama unfolding. "Summer, this is completely inappropriate," Alec said as he reached their table, his voice low but intense. "We need to discuss this privately, not in a public restaurant with—" He glanced dismissively at Hudson and Rosie. "With these people present." "These people," Summer said calmly, "are my family. Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of them." Alec's jaw tightened. He pulled out a chair and sat without being invited, leaning forward with the aggressive posture of someone used to intimidating opponents into submission. "You're making a terrible mistake," he said. "I spoke with Mr. Vaughn at the office. I made the situation very clear. The board will not tolerate you continuing this inappropriate relationship while serving as CEO. Your judgment is compromised." "My judgment has never been clearer," Summer countered. "You threatened me, Alec. You used my company, the thing I built from nothing, as leverage to control my personal life. That's not protecting me. That's manipulation." "I'm protecting the company," Alec insisted. "And protecting you from a man who is obviously using you for financial gain. Look at him, Summer. Look at where he comes from. What could he possibly want from you besides money?" Hudson started to respond, but Summer squeezed his hand, asking him silently to let her handle this. She'd spent too long letting other people fight her battles. "What Hudson wants," Summer said clearly, "is exactly what he's given me. Kindness, acceptance, love. He's never asked me for money, never mentioned my wealth, never treated me like a business opportunity. He treated me like a human being when everyone else, including you, treated me like a problem to be managed." "You're sick," Alec said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "The cancer, the treatments, they're affecting your thinking. You're not capable of making sound decisions right now. Don't you dare." Summer's voice turned to steel. "Don't you dare use my illness as an excuse to dismiss my choices. I have cancer, Alec. I'm not incompetent. I'm not a helpless invalid who needs you to make decisions for me." "The board disagrees," Alec said coldly. "They're prepared to invoke the medical clause in your contract. We can have you declared temporarily unfit to serve as CEO based on your health and your recent erratic behavior. You'll be placed on medical leave while we restructure the company leadership." It was the nuclear option, the threat Summer had known was coming, but had hoped to avoid. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, other conversations dying away as people sensed the stakes of what was unfolding. Before Summer could respond, Rosie did something unexpected. She climbed down from her chair and walked directly to Alec, standing in front of him with her hands on her hips, looking up at this powerful man with the fearless clarity only a 7-year-old could possess. "You're a bully," Rosie said clearly, her small voice carrying through the quiet restaurant. My teacher says bullies are people who try to control other people because they're scared inside. Is that why you're being mean to Miss Summer? Because you're scared? Alec looked down at this small girl, clearly unprepared for being confronted by someone so young. Little girl, you don't understand adult business. I understand mean, Rosie said firmly. And I understand love. Miss Summer loves us and we love her. She was so sad before she met us. She sat all alone at this table, with nobody to talk to. My daddy and me, we helped her remember how to smile. Why do you want to take that away? Don't you want her to be happy? Happiness isn't the priority here, Alex said, his tone sharp. Business stability is. Corporate responsibility is. That's sad, Rosie said. And something in her simple assessment made Alec flinch. You care more about business than about people. That's why you're alone, isn't it? That's why you don't smile like Daddy and Miss Summer smile. Hudson gently called Rosie back to their side of the table, but the damage to Alec's composure was done. He looked shaken, as if a mirror had been held up showing him something he'd been avoiding seeing. Summer, Alec began, his voice less certain now. I'm trying to do what's best. For whom? Summer challenged. For me? Or for the merger you've been pushing? For months. The one that would make you and the other board members incredibly wealthy but would gut everything I built? Is that what this is really about, Alec? You need me compliant and focused so you can sell my company out from under me? Alec's silence was answer enough. Summer saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he was reassessing his approach now that his true motivations had been exposed. I've been reviewing the board minutes, Summer continued. Did you think I wouldn't notice? All those closed sessions I wasn't invited to. The discussions about merger opportunities and buyout offers. You've been planning this for months, waiting for an opportunity to push me aside. My cancer diagnosis must have seemed like a gift, a perfect excuse to claim I wasn't fit to lead. You're paranoid, Alex said, but the denial lacked conviction. I'm observant, Summer corrected, and I'm done playing games. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to the board and tell them that I'm remaining as CEO, that I'm in full control of my faculties and my decisions. That my personal life is exactly that, personal, and has no bearing on my ability to lead the company. And if I refuse? Alec challenged. Then I'll take this public, Summer said calmly. I'll hold a press conference and explain exactly how my board of directors tried to use my cancer diagnosis to force me out so they could sell the company against my wishes. I'll detail the threats you made against Hudson and his business. I'll expose every unethical tactic you've employed. The PR nightmare alone will tank any merger discussions, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who was responsible. Alec paled. Public opinion was a powerful weapon, and Summer wielded it with the precision of someone who understood corporate warfare better than he'd given her credit for. You wouldn't, he said, but it sounded like a question. Try me, Summer said. I have nothing left to lose, Alec. You've already threatened everything I care about. The company, Hudson, my autonomy. What more can you take? But you have everything to lose. Your reputation, your career, your precious merger deal. So the question is, are you willing to risk all of that to continue trying to control me? The standoff stretched between them, tension thick enough to cut. Other diners were openly watching now, their meals forgotten in the face of this very public drama. Finally, Alec stood, adjusting his jacket with jerky movements that betrayed his agitation. This isn't over, he said, the threat empty compared to his earlier confidence. Yes, it is, Summer said firmly. It's over because I say it's over. You're fired, Alec. Effective immediately. I'll have HR send the formal paperwork. But consider this your official notice. You've lost sight of what matters. And I won't have someone like that in a leadership position at my company. Alec's face flushed with anger and humiliation. You can't fire me. The board has to approve that. Check the bylaws, Summer said. As CEO and majority shareholder, I have the authority to dismiss executive officers for cause, and attempting to blackmail me definitely qualifies as cause. You can fight it if you want, but I have documentation of every threat you made, every manipulation you attempted. Do you really want this to go to court? The fight drained out of Alec visibly. He looked around the restaurant at all the witnesses to his defeat, then back at Summer, with something that might have been grudging respect, mixed with bitterness. You've changed, he said quietly. I've remembered who I am, Summer corrected. I'm someone who fights for what matters. And Hudson and Rosie matter more than corporate politics or board approval or any merger deal. They matter more than anything. Alec left without another word, his exit lacking the dramatic flair of his entrance. He simply walked out, a defeated man who had gambled on controlling someone he'd underestimated. As soon as he was gone, the restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause. Summer realized their entire confrontation had been witnessed by dozens of people, all of whom had apparently been rooting for her side of the conflict. She looked at Hudson and Rosie, seeing her own relief and triumph reflected in their faces. Rosie climbed back into her lap, hugging her tightly. You were so brave, Miss Summer, Rosie whispered. Just like your bracelet says. Summer looked down at the thread bracelet still on her wrist, the one that spelled brave in colorful beads. She'd worn it every day since Rosie had given it to her, a talisman of the courage she'd forgotten she possessed. Hudson reached across the table, taking her free hand. Are you okay? That was intense. I'm better than okay, Summer said, and realized it was true. Standing up to Alec, refusing to let fear control her decisions, had been terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I feel like I can breathe again for the first time in weeks. What happens now? Hudson asked. With the company? With everything? Now, Summer said. We figure it out together. I need to deal with the board fallout, restructure leadership, probably fight off a few more merger attempts. But I'll do it on my own terms, making my own choices. And at the end of every Tuesday, I'll be right here, at this table, with the two people who taught me what really matters. The hostess approached tentatively, clearly unsure whether they wanted privacy after such a public scene. Can I get you anything? Dinner? Dessert? Summer looked at the menu, then at Rosie's hopeful face, and smiled. Chocolate cake. The one with the sparkly candles. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Rosie asked. Freedom, Summer said simply. And family. And choosing love over fear. The aftermath of Summer's confrontation with Alec sent shockwaves through Holt Digital Solutions. By the next morning, news of the CFO's firing had spread through the company, along with wildly varying accounts of what had happened at the Garden Terrace. Summer called an emergency board meeting, walking into the conference room with Hudson by her side, a choice that made several board members visibly uncomfortable. She'd asked him to be there, wanted them to see the man they'd so casually threatened without ever bothering to know. I'm sure you've all heard that I terminated Alec Jennings yesterday, Summer began without preamble. Before any of you object or threaten legal action, I want you to understand exactly why. She laid out everything methodically, producing documentation of Alec's threats against Hudson, evidence of the merger discussions he'd been conducting behind her back, and copies of communications showing he'd been actively undermining her authority while claiming to protect her. Alec used my cancer diagnosis as leverage to try to control my personal and professional decisions, Summer said, her voice steady and clear. He threatened a man whose only crime was caring about me. He tried to force me to choose between my company and my happiness. And he did all of this, claiming it was for my own good. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Sarah Wilkins, the head of HR, who had pushed back against Alec's initial concerns, spoke first. Summer, many of us had no idea it had gone this far. Alec presented your relationship with Mr. Vaughn as a judgment issue, not a personal vendetta. Which is exactly the problem, Summer said. You were all too willing to assume that my cancer made me incapable of making sound decisions. You saw me as a liability instead of as the person who built this company from nothing." She paused, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "I have cancer. I'm undergoing treatment, but my mind is clear, my judgment is sound, and I'm still the best person to lead this company. If any of you disagree, you're welcome to resign, but I will not tolerate anyone using my illness as an excuse to undermine my authority or control my personal life." One of the older board members, Gregory Shaw, cleared his throat. "Miss Holt, I think I speak for several of us when I say we owe you an apology. We allowed Alec to frame this situation in a way that made us complicit in some deeply inappropriate behavior. We should have questioned his motives more carefully." "Yes, you should have," Summer agreed. "But more than that, you should have talked to me directly, asked me about my treatment, my prognosis, my capacity to continue leading. Instead, you had private meetings and made decisions about my fitness without ever consulting me." "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "We treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a colleague to be supported. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Hudson had been silent throughout the meeting, but now he spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Can I say something?" The board members looked surprised that he would address them directly, but Summer nodded encouragingly. "I'm not a businessman," Hudson began. "I paint houses and restore old buildings. I don't understand corporate politics or board dynamics, but I understand people. And I understand what it looks like when someone is being broken down instead of built up." He looked around the table, meeting the eyes of people who had far more education and wealth than he did, but who had forgotten something essential about humanity. "When I met Summer, she was drowning, not from the cancer, but from loneliness, from being surrounded by people who saw her as a CEO or a patient or an asset, but never as just Summer, a woman who loves reading mystery novels and makes terrible jokes when she's nervous, who cries during animated movies and has strong opinions about coffee, who's fighting for her life and just needed someone to see her as worth fighting for." His words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Several board members looked away, unable to hold his gaze. "My daughter Rosie saw Summer immediately," Hudson continued. "Saw her sadness, her isolation, her desperate need for connection, and Rosie, being 7 and wise in ways adults forget, simply offered friendship, no agenda, no calculation, just pure human kindness. That's what Summer needed. That's what she'd been missing." He turned to Summer, his expression softening. "You all seem worried that I'm using her for money. But the truth is, Summer saved us first. My daughter and I were stuck in our own kind of isolation, living around the ghost of the wife and mother we'd lost. Summer brought light back into our home. She gave Rosie someone to love who wasn't me. She gave me hope that maybe life could hold more than just survival. We needed her, as much as she needed us." The conference room was silent. Sarah Wilkins had tears in her eyes. Even Gregory Shaw, known for his ruthless business acumen, looked moved. "The question you all need to ask yourselves," Hudson finished, "is whether you're going to keep treating Summer like a problem that needs managing, or whether you're going to trust her to know what's best for her own life. Because from where I'm sitting, she's shown more strength and clarity in the past few months than most people demonstrate in a lifetime." Summer reached for Hudson's hand under the table, squeezing it gratefully. He'd articulated what she'd been trying to make them understand. Stripped away all the corporate language to expose the essential human truth underneath. Gregory Shaw spoke first. "Mr. Vaughn, you're right. We've been treating Summer as if her value was purely professional, forgetting that she's a person first and a CEO second. That was short-sighted and cruel, even if unintentionally so." He turned to Summer. "I move that we formally acknowledge your continued fitness to serve as CEO, and that we commit to supporting your treatment and recovery without questioning your judgment or authority." All in favor? The vote was unanimous. Summer felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying since the first board meeting where Alec had raised concerns about her capability. "Thank you," she said simply. "I know I scared you all when I got sick. I scared myself. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And I'm still the best person to lead this company into the future. The only difference now is that I have people in my corner who remind me why that future is worth fighting for." After the meeting ended and the board members filed out, Sarah lingered behind. She approached Summer hesitantly. "Can I share something personal?" Sarah asked. Summer nodded. "My sister had breast cancer 5 years ago," Sarah said quietly. "Stage 3. Like you. The treatments were brutal, and she lost almost everyone in her life because people didn't know how to handle it. They disappeared rather than face their own discomfort with her mortality. She survived the cancer, but told me the loneliness almost killed her." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "When Alec brought his concerns to the board, I should have pushed back harder. I should have recognized what he was really doing. I should have protected you better. I'm so sorry, Summer. You deserved better from all of us." Summer stood and pulled Sarah into a hug, feeling the other woman's genuine remorse. "We're moving forward," Summer said. "All of us. Together." Over the next few weeks, the dynamics at Holt Digital Solutions shifted dramatically. Summer brought in new leadership to replace Alec. People who understood that supporting their CEO meant supporting her whole life, not just her professional performance. She restructured board meeting schedules to accommodate her treatment calendar without apology. Most significantly, she stopped hiding. She attended company events with Hudson and Rosie, introducing them proudly as her family. She spoke openly in team meetings about her cancer journey, normalizing conversations about illness and recovery. She demonstrated that vulnerability and leadership weren't mutually exclusive. The company culture began to change. People started talking more openly about their own struggles, their own needs for flexibility and support. Work-life balance became a priority rather than a buzzword. Summer's willingness to be fully human, to acknowledge her limitations while still leading effectively, gave others permission to do the same. One afternoon, Summer sat in her office with Hudson and Rosie, the three of them working on a puzzle while Summer took calls and reviewed documents. It was a strange tableau, the CEO multitasking between corporate responsibilities and family time. But it felt right. Felt whole. "Miss Summer," Rosie said, carefully placing a puzzle piece. "Are you still sick?" "I am," Summer said honestly. "The cancer is getting smaller, but it's still there. I have more treatments ahead of me." "But you're not sad anymore," Rosie observed. "Not like when we first met you." Summer considered this. "No, I'm not sad anymore. I'm still sick, and sometimes I'm scared, and some days the treatments make me feel awful. But I'm not alone. That makes all the difference." Hudson looked up from the puzzle, his eyes warm. "You know what Jessica used to say? That life isn't measured in years, but in moments. Moments of connection, of love, of showing up for each other. By that measure, we're all living very full lives." Summer thought about the moments that had brought them here. A chance encounter at a restaurant, a little girl's instinct for loneliness, a man brave enough to approach a stranger, her own decision to fight for happiness despite the risks. "I used to think success meant building something that would outlast me," Summer said. "A company, a legacy, something permanent. But I understand now that the real legacy is this: teaching Rosie that kindness matters, showing my team that vulnerability is strength, learning from Hudson that love is worth fighting for." "That's very philosophical," Hudson teased gently. "Does this mean you're going to start writing inspirational posters for the office?" Summer laughed, throwing a puzzle piece at him. "Don't push your luck. I'm still a CEO. I still have a ruthless side." "Good," Hudson said, catching the puzzle piece. "I like your ruthless side. It's hot." "Daddy, what does hot mean?" Rosie asked innocently. "It means she's impressive," Hudson said quickly, while Summer tried not to laugh. Very impressive and strong. Oh. Rosie accepted this explanation easily. Miss Summer is the most impressive person I know. She fights bad cells and mean bored people, and she does it all while smiling at us. Summer pulled Rosie into her lap, holding this remarkable person who had changed everything simply by seeing her. You know what, Rosie? You're the most impressive person I know. You taught me something very important. What's that? Rosie asked. That bravery isn't about not being scared, Summer said. It's about being scared and choosing love anyway. Choosing to connect, to hope, to show up even when it's hard. You did that for me when you walked up to my table that first night. You were brave enough to offer friendship to a stranger. That changed my whole life. Rosie hugged her tightly. I'm glad I was brave, because now you're my family, and family is the best thing ever. Hudson joined the embrace, wrapping his arms around both of them. In that moment, surrounded by love in her office where she'd once felt so isolated, Summer understood that healing wasn't about returning to who you were before the trauma. It was about becoming someone new, someone shaped by both the breaking and the mending. She'd been broken by cancer, by loneliness, by the fear of dying alone. But she'd been mended by Hudson's steady presence, by Rosie's innocent wisdom, by her own courage in choosing to be vulnerable again. The cancer might still win in the end. There were no guarantees, no promises of forever. But right now, in this moment, she was whole. She was loved. She was exactly where she needed to be. And that, Summer realized, was its own kind of miracle. 10 months later, the garden terrace was transformed with balloons and streamers in shades of purple and gold. Rosie had turned 8, and she'd insisted on celebrating at the restaurant where, as she told anyone who would listen, her family had been born. Summer sat at their usual corner table, watching Hudson hang decorations with the help of several Holt Digital Solutions employees who had volunteered to help set up. The sight still amazed her, this blending of her professional and personal worlds that once seemed impossible. Her hair had started growing back, short and curly in a way she'd never worn it before. The scarf collection remained, but now she chose scarves for fashion rather than necessity. Her latest scans had shown no evidence of disease. The word remission had been spoken by her oncologist with cautious optimism, followed by careful explanations about monitoring and continued vigilance. But Summer was alive, thriving, even. The cancer that had once defined her entire existence had become just one part of her story rather than the only chapter. Sarah Wilkins arrived carrying an elaborate cake shaped like an artist's palette, complete with edible paint tubes. She'd become not just a board member but a genuine friend, someone who checked in on Summer's health without making it the only topic of conversation. Rosie's going to lose her mind when she sees this, Sarah said, carefully setting down the cake. Where is the birthday girl? Patricia asked, looking around. Hudson took her to pick up Summer's surprise, one of the employees said with a knowing smile. Summer's surprise turned out to be a portrait Hudson had commissioned from a local artist, based on Rosie's painting from the school art show. The professional version showed the three of them at their table, rendered in beautiful detail, capturing not just their faces but the love between them. For our home, Hudson said softly, presenting it to Summer. So, we always remember where we started. Summer's eyes filled with happy tears. Our home, she repeated, loving the sound of those words. She and Hudson had been looking at houses together, searching for something bigger than his craftsman but cozier than her penthouse. Somewhere Rosie could have a bigger backyard, and Summer could have a first-floor bedroom for the days when stairs felt impossible. Somewhere they could build their future together. The party was joyful chaos. Rosie held court like a tiny queen, showing off her presence and making sure everyone got cake. She'd invited friends from school, but also people from Summer's office, understanding instinctively that family wasn't about blood but about the people who showed up. As the celebration wound down, Hudson pulled Summer aside to the exact spot where he and Rosie had first approached her table all those months ago. He took both her hands, his expression serious but warm. "Summer Holt," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "10 months ago, my daughter and I walked into this restaurant and found you sitting alone. We had no idea that asking to join you would change all of our lives." Summer's heart began racing as Hudson dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "You've taught Rosie that courage means fighting for what matters. You've taught me that it's never too late for second chances. You've shown us both what it means to choose love even when it's terrifying. Will you marry us? Will you let us be your family officially, legally, permanently?" The ring was simple and perfect, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Summer looked at Hudson's hopeful face, then at Rosie bouncing excitedly nearby, clearly in on the surprise. "Yes," Summer said, laughing through tears. "Yes to you, yes to Rosie, yes to choosing us every single day." The restaurant erupted in applause as Hudson slipped the ring on her finger. Rosie launched herself at them both, and they held each other in the space where loneliness had once lived but love had taken root. Later, as the last guests departed and they prepared to leave, Summer looked around the garden terrace with gratitude. This ordinary restaurant had been the setting for the most extraordinary transformation of her life. She thought about the woman who had sat here alone months ago, convinced her cancer diagnosis meant the end of everything. That woman could never have imagined this future, this family, this abundance of love. "Ready to go home?" Hudson asked, his arm around her waist. Summer looked at him, at Rosie holding her hand, at the life they were building together despite every obstacle. She thought about board meetings and treatment schedules, about Tuesday dinners and Sunday pancakes, about all the ordinary moments that had become extraordinary simply because they were shared. "Yes," Summer said, meaning it with her whole heart. "Let's go home." As they walked out into the evening air, Summer touched the bracelet on her wrist, the one that spelled "brave" in colorful beads. She'd been brave enough to fight cancer, brave enough to love again, brave enough to choose happiness over fear. But the bravest thing she'd ever done was simply accepting that single dad's invitation to not eat alone. Everything else had grown from that one moment of saying yes to connection, yes to vulnerability, yes to the terrifying possibility that broken things could become whole again. The cancer might return someday. Life offered no guarantees. But Summer had learned that the only moment that mattered was this one. Right now. Walking between the two people who had saved her by letting her save them in return. And in this moment, she was exactly where she belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.